Well, good day, everyone. What I'd like to do is go through root cause analysis. I believe everyone has heard of this, but I'm going to put a little twist on it. I'm going to look at a risk-based approach. So hopefully that'll help you improve your systems. Why take a risk-based approach? Really, you're trying to be preventive versus reactive. I think a lot of people know about the Food Safety Modernization Act in the U.S. This not only would apply to people manufacturing, distributing, and storing food in the United States, but also through the Foreign Supplier Verification Program, all of the imported foods coming into the U.S. will have to have an equivalent system. So it's very important to take advantage of that if it's appropriate for you. One thing with the risk-based approach is that it'll reduce the potential for having recalls or, God forbid, regulatory action. And in the worst case scenario, if you've engaged in any criminal activity, the Department of Justice has investigated several companies, Bluebell, Chipotle in the United States. I hate to be so U.S.-centric here, but those are the examples that I'm giving today. So we want to avoid the adverse impacts, but if we have a risk-based approach, that'll help us prioritize our corrective and preventive action. And this is where you would look at the severity and likelihood of that hazard occurring. In other words, has it happened in your facility, and could it happen again? Because after all, this provides the continuous improvement program for your organization. So I'm just going to ask a question. Are you doing this now? I would say you are, because if you have a HACCP program, you would have to look at the likelihood and severity of these hazards occurring, be they biological, chemical, and physical. So this is a very important chart in the United States. The FDA comes out with a yearly review of what is causing foodborne disease and illness in the United States. And I just want you to take a look at it. If you look at undeclared allergens, that is 47% of all the recalls in the United States. And then if you were to add Salmonella, 25%, and Listeria monocytogenes, 19%, you would come to realize that 91% of all of the recalls domestically in the United States are from those three things. So what the regulators are telling us is that we have to investigate and be in a preventive mode to reduce any of these potentials for recalls. And there's one other thing I'd like to point out. If you notice here, there's nothing there for foreign material. It doesn't mean that foreign material doesn't occur, but it's actually less than 0.5%. And when you think about companies that spend a lot of time on foreign material, in actuality, 91% of the real recalls are caused by undeclared allergens and those two pathogens, Salmonella and Listeria. So again, if we were to apply a risk-based approach, we would define within our organization what is acceptable and what is unacceptable. I don't think it will shock anyone that we all realize that sometimes people don't agree, and that is in between departments. In other words, who's responsible for what? So it's very important that this is a no debate issue, because what we're trying to do is mitigate our risk of any of those adverse effects that could allow to hurt our brand or, God forbid, hurt any of our consumers. So once we have the preventive and corrective action in place, we have to implement the plan. We have to do audits. We have to do inspections. And then through the quality cycle, which is plan, do, check, and act, we are going to prioritize the most important ones that present risk to our organization and correct them and prevent them from occurring again. So what processes present the most risk for your organization? As I've discussed, Undeclared allergens. In other words, we put the wrong product in the wrong bag. We've had cross-contamination in our plant with regards to allergens that are not declared on the label. It could be from traffic patterns. It could be from not segregating, color coding, ingredient containers. All of that stuff can occur. And if we're talking about pathogens, certainly the environment of the plant, the structure, the traffic patterns, how we operate. In other words, are we operating in a clean and hygienic manner? And then, of course, personnel, good personal hygiene. And there could be a myriad of other issues that could or need to be addressed to make sure our food is safe. So we have a polling question here. When we identify an issue during a self-inspection or internal audit, we must conduct a root cause analysis and implement effective measures. How would we answer that?
Okay, I've loaded the poll in the sidebar. When we identify an issue during a self-inspection or internal audit, we conduct root cause analysis and implement effective preventive measures. Sometimes or always. Hopefully you can see the results coming there. At the moment, 3% never. Sometimes and always 60%. That's quite a high score.
Yes, it is.
Yeah,
I'd like to talk to that 3%.
Never. Yeah. Yeah, but at least the vast majority are at least sometimes doing it, and yeah, 61% always doing that. Okay. Can move on, Lem.
Very good. So now we're getting down to what is root cause analysis. Root cause, and again, I'm using the American Society of Quality glossary here, a factor that caused a nonconformance and should be permanently eliminated through a process improvement. In other words, you're going to be doing something differently. And if we apply our root cause analysis, this is a collective term to describe many different approaches, which we will be discussing today. And these techniques will help you drill down and find out what is the cause. And we will give you some examples, hopefully interesting examples, of how you can apply that. So if we're doing a root cause analysis, generally you have a brainstorming session. You would include other people from other departments to make sure that they are involved, because they bring a certain amount of expertise, be it quality, processing, preventive maintenance, even engineering, to bring those experts in so we do a good investigation. An investigation typically will be done maybe through the quality department, but certainly having other people in is a good idea. I'd like to discuss the weed analogy. It's kind of just something you can put in your mind, is that a lot of people, if they're picking weeds, they would, of course, take the top of the plant. And if you don't get the root out or get to the root cause, then obviously you're not going to solve the problem and the weed is going to grow back again. So that's just a little example of how some people would approach it. So now we're going to have hopefully an interesting example here. This is actually the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. in the U.S., a huge monument. And the stone was deteriorating on the outside of the building. Basically, what they were doing is coming back and replacing the deteriorating stone and painting over it. But the problem kept occurring over and over again. So if we are asking why is this stone deteriorating? In this case, they were using high pressure sprayers every 2 weeks. And why are we doing this high powered cleaning every 2 weeks? because the birds were coming to the memorial and crapping on things. So we did a little experiment. We tried to use exclusion. We came in with netting, which is very expensive, and we put that all over. But we didn't really get to the root cause. So we need to ask that questions. Why are there so many birds? And the answer would be is that they are feeding on spiders. So if we're doing and applying a technique for root cause, why are there so many spiders? They are feeding on insects. So we need to ask ourselves, why are there so many insects? And when we drilled down to the root cause, we found out that this building was the first one to turn their lights on every single evening. So most of the insects were going to that building before they were going to others. So the problem, which was the deteriorating stone, the solution was to come back and turn on the lights a little later so that the insects would go to other buildings. So this is the 5 whys, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with it. In other words, you ask why over and over again until you get to the point where you can't ask it anymore. And this is the fishbone diagram, which I'm sure some of you use with regards to doing your root cause investigation, and I will give you some examples of how this can be applied. So if we look at the 5 whys first, it's very simple. It's very easy to do. It's not fixed at 5. You can ask as many whys as necessary. And of course, what you're trying to do is not have superficial solutions. I think most of you, if you think about your GMP inspection and internal audit, if you are getting any repeat items or things that are occurring over and over again, you are not doing appropriate root cause investigation, because if you were, it would drill down and find out what the bottom problem was. So let's do a little application here. In this case, you're at your facility. In this case, they have drain flies, and they were noted along the cake line. So we ask ourselves, why are there so many drain flies along the cake line? And the answer is they are feeding on waste from the cake line. Why are they feeding on waste from the cake line? Because the waste is there and it's fermenting. And why is the waste fermenting? It is sitting in the waste containers until the next down day, which typically means an entire week. So why is it sitting in waste containers until the next down day? And the answer would be because no one has been assigned the responsibility for emptying the waste containers at the end of the shift. Again, just an easy application. This is another example here. We have unprotected lights in a product zone area. So we need to ask, why is there unprotected bulbs in a product zone area? And it's installed by maintenance, but it might not be maintenance's problem. Why did maintenance install an unprotected bulb in a product zone area? The bulbs were in inventory, were unprotected. In other words, they're supposed to receive coated bulbs, but in this case, they actually received unprotected ones. Why were there unprotected bulbs in inventory? We get back to the receiving, where the packing list for the bulbs indicated that they were protected, but in fact they weren't. And the receiving clerk did not confirm that the bulbs were in fact coated. So we drill down again. Why didn't the receiving clerk confirm that the bulbs were protected? And the answer here was the clerk was not trained to confirm that non-food materials received were correct or matched to the packing list. So the final why is, why wasn't the receiving clerk trained to confirm the accuracy of the incoming goods? It wasn't in their procedure. So if you were to apply the corrective action, you would go back, revise the procedure, do the necessary training so that problem would not occur again in the future. So let's look at another application here. We're going to look at fishbone diagram. Up I think you can tell that this is looks similar to a fish. The arrows there would be the bones, and then the problem would be listed in that circle or the head part of this diagram. So if you're in a facility, you are looking at your equipment, your processes, the people that are working there, the raw materials and goods, the environment, the traffic patterns, how people come in your plant, how raw materials are moved through your facility, and any measurement systems that you may have in place. So what comes under these headings here? If we look at equipment, we have all of our process equipment, any of our tools, utensils. We can have computers there out on the floor, sanitation equipment. We could have high-speed doors. We have maintenance working in all sorts of areas in the facility. We have forklifts. We have ingredient utensils and scoops. We may have a boiler and a heating and ventilation system. So this would all come under the heading of equipment. So let's look at processes that we may have to look at. We have a lot of cleaning procedures. We have process procedures. All of us are operating under a food safety plan. We have work instructions to tell us the best way to do things. QA procedures, maintenance procedures. In a documented food safety system, we would always have work instructions and procedures to tell us how the best way to do things. We would have first in, first out, preventive maintenance schedule, and our master cleaning schedule, which is an inventory of all of the storage areas, equipment, bulk systems, oil tanks, and when they are cleaned on a certain frequency. So underneath the heading of people, we have the processing people, line operators, supervisors, quality technicians, sanitation people, our maintenance manager and supervisor, HR, our receiving clerk and contractors. So all of these people, pest control included, bulk delivery, all these things would come under the heading of people. For materials, our ingredients, our packaging, process aids and rework, work in process, and finished goods. The environment is something that's taken on a new importance, particularly if you make ready-to-eat product, because we need to protect that product from environmental pathogens. So we would look at the building, the structure, our changeover, the level of cleanliness necessary so we don't have violative or unsanitary conditions. Our measurement systems, temperature checks, weight checks, anything that helps us stay out of trouble with food safety. Our metal detectors could even be moisture and water activity. So these are examples that would come under with the Fishbone analysis. So let's apply this. We have a decomposing rodent in trap number 14. So where would we put this? Environment. Construction has begun in an empty field next to the plant. So why is this a problem? Contractors are working to install new X-ray equipment, and they were leaving the doors open. I'm sure that would not happen at your facility, but yes, it does occur. Materials, obsolete packaging in the warehouse caused inventory overload, and it was stored in front of that trap, so that trap was never accessed. So it's very important that we apply and look and drill down to find out exactly what the root cause was. And in that case, they had improper storage, which did not allow for the trap to be checked. So what are some of the common pitfalls? Seeing the symptoms and not looking at the system as a whole. Thinking in a very singular fashion. In other words, if you replace lights and they're damaged and you are replacing lights on a regular basis, you are not drilling down to the root cause. And one other common pitfall, very, very important here, is not to find fault with people, because you are looking at the process, you are not looking at people individually. Seeing the symptoms. The drain fly activity in the production area. Production left waste in the area at the end of the shift, expecting that sanitation would remove it. In other words, the responsibilities for these activities, removal of waste, were not defined. Another example could be metal wear in a pump, where you would have to have assembly by a maintenance person, but in this case, the sanitation department assembled it, and it wasn't done in the right fashion, so we had wear directly in a product zone area. Unidentified items in the hold area. This is where production put the materials in the hold area and expected QA to mark them. So again, just not looking at the system, but drilling down to make sure we get to the issue. And really what it was is that the responsibilities were not clearly defined in the procedures, and in some cases, people may or may not have been trained properly. This is an example of a singular cause. We have a nonconformance. We have a can of household insecticide that is found in the maintenance shop. We all know the use of chemicals, particularly pesticides, is typically restricted. Some of the causes: we had some standing water on the grounds, broken sprinkler, which allowed for a habitat for aquatic insects to grow. The dumpster was damaged and leaking. The air curtains at the plant were not properly turned on. The contracted PCO apparently didn't notice this. Like most plants, we had a pest sighting log communicating with the PCO, but it was not acted upon. And a general lack of awareness for the chemical control program, on which pesticides, which would be a restricted use chemical. So carrying on with common pitfalls is that you are auditing the system. You are not auditing people personally. Many times in a company, you will see retraining written down over and over again. In many cases, retraining is not the problem. You have to go back and analyze what the real problem is. It could be that departments aren't getting along together, or some people aren't following through on what the corrective action is. So it's very, very important that you do this, because in the end, we would like our employees to succeed. And if we don't apply root cause analysis in this fashion, there could be a potential for failure. So really what we have here is a summary of the root cause analysis, some examples. These were the lighter examples, but in the beginning, when we're looking at root cause, it is obvious that there needs to be a hierarchy of importance and prioritization. And that's why we had the slides in there with regards to regulatory action. Regardless of where you are in the world, if you put out contaminated product, you're likely to have a recall, and it is going to impact you. Recalls, particularly larger ones, cost in the millions and millions of dollars. And then when you look at the damage to your brand, it's very important that you be preventive rather than reactive. We talked about the need for brainstorming, bringing in enough people, all these different expertise. And then, of course, having a formality to your investigation where you actually drill down. It doesn't matter if you use the 5Y, Fishbone analysis, any of these are appropriate. And it needs to be very in-depth, can't be superficial. So again, we are focusing on the processes and not the people. So, do you have any questions? I do see some of the questions. Should I carry on, Simon? Regarding root cause analysis, how can we control allergens that come from suppliers? Well, that's a very interesting question. I think that a lot of people try to cover themselves with regards to informing people that it may contain this or that. But really, the application of this has changed somewhat, because If again, I'm giving you the regulatory perspective in the United States, is that if you have that type of labeling, you need to have it based on some type of information. In other words, you can't just put may contain. There needs to be a reason for it. So in this case, you would have to perform some testing to say that, yes, our product does contain.
Okay.
And if you do that, then you have the basis where you can actually use that type of labeling. But it can never be used as a substitute for good GMPs.
I'm back, Len. I apologize for this. There's something wrong with my connection. Any more questions?
I picked a question and I answered it because I figured you were having a little difficulty.
Oh, great. Thanks, Len.
Yep.
The chat bar for me is, okay, we've got one. Rasha, how to get precise info from personnel while investigating an issue. Some personnel might omit important details.
Well, that's sounding a lot like espionage here. I think when you have a situation like that, you need to be cooperative. In other words, everybody needs to be on the same page. When we show up to work, and it is a food plant, the number one responsibility of everyone from the top down is food safety first. And quite honestly, I know that isn't always the case. And obviously, some people are not as cooperative as they should be. But if you have a situation like that, someone is going to have to take the bull by the horns, be it the plant manager, the owner, the chief executive officer, and give everybody a little bit of religion. In other words, there's certain things that have to be done a certain way.
Yeah, great. Esperanza is asking, does every non-conformance need a root cause analysis?
No, and that, quite honestly, Esperanza, is why we had that risk-based approach, because there are some things that are more important than others. Most people have a classification system, and it is usually tied to the regulatory requirements, and in other words, recalls. Class 1 may cause death or injury. Class 2 may cause an adverse health effect, and Class 3 is no apparent health hazard. So those issues that would fall in the Class 3, where there is no potential for food safety issues, they could have minimal root cause analysis. But certainly anything that is a food safety issue, Class 1, Class 2, would have to have some pretty extensive investigation. And again, I know you're juggling a lot of balls. You're responsible for quality of the product, getting the product produced on time. So you would have a system of prioritizing, and of course, food safety, efficiency, and all the things that make you a good company would typically require a root cause investigation.
Yeah, great. And Abigail, how do we measure the effectiveness of corrective actions taken?
Excellent question. Whenever you do a corrective action, you're always required to revisit it, and the term typically used is verification. In other words, you would come back, you would do a variety of actions, and then you would, at some point, you would have to judge the effectiveness of that. And that's why that verification step is very, very important. And that is why I tried to emphasize that if you're in a system where you're getting repeat items on similar or, in fact, the same issue, then you need to do that root cause and probably bring in the executive management, because the problem is bigger than just a normal corrective action.
Yeah. Great. And Bruce, can you suggest other tools other than 5 Whys and Fishbone / Ishikawa diagrams?
Well, if you right now you're probably using root cause analysis or preventive activities in your HACCP plant. In other words, you're going through and doing an analysis of not only what could happen, you're looking at the history, So you were applying, in your HACCP program, you were applying essentially a root cause analysis prior to your manufacturing.
Okay. John, if a why has multiple answers, how can we choose the right one?
I wish I had the magic wand for you, but actually, if you have multiple whys, then you would have to go down all those streams and you would have to drill down into each and every one of them.
Yeah, and in reality, Len, I think things aren't always linear, are they? There are often multiple causes for a problem. You know, often it's more complex than a linear. You know, this is the answer. There's often several, perhaps, causes.
Absolutely. I mean, I can give you examples that actually occurred this week. I was at a facility and they were receiving bulk oil, and they have to have a strainer in place to remove, potential foreign material. So I'm there doing a consult. I ask them to open up the strainer, and guess what? The strainer isn't there. So, and they're receiving oil. So I started asking why. And they said that, well, the strainer is out for repair because it was damaged. In other words, it would add foreign material itself. And then I had been out for repair for like, didn't think it was a priority. So they were doing other things. So during the last 2 weeks, this company, which you probably eat their product, we're receiving bulk oil, tons of gallons of oil without being strained prior to being put in the tank. So believe me, these things happen, and they happen on a daily basis. So that's why you need to be vigilant and make sure that your systems are strong.
Yeah, super. Okay. If I do a good root cause for a non-conformity and the same problem recurs, what is the solution? That's from Morad.
Okay. I don't want to give you a one-line answer, but the only thing I can really tell you is that and that's why I emphasize repeats, because if you are having repeats, the root cause analysis isn't done properly. I can give you an example where a company was having trouble with listeria, and I actually came in and to help them, and they were finding listeria over and over again. And what we found out after we did an extensive amount of sampling, in other words, we had to be aggressive. We found that they have what's called or termed persistent listeria. In other words, the company had been open for so long, the listeria was actually into the walls, it was into the concrete. So unfortunately, in this case, the only way they could do real corrective action is they had to cover over parts of the walls. In some cases, they had to jackhammer the concrete out and put in new concrete. So, that's just an example. I don't know if I answered your question, but if you have something that's happening over and over again, you have to do different measures, different investigative techniques. You may even have to bring in a consultant to help you.
Yeah. Okay. Ehab is asking, well, basically, is it okay if we get to the answer before we do the full 5 whys?
Oh, you want to take a shortcut? Well, it would probably be in your best interest if it's obvious that you can do corrective action without a lot of documentation. Then do your corrective action, because if you didn't do it properly, it'll happen over again, and then you will have to do the 5 whys. So I do understand there are issues that occur that are easily corrected, but then again, there are significant issues that occur that require a formal investigation.
Yeah. Hamid, could we apply the same approach to analyze the root cause of deviations in laboratory results?
Absolutely. And I've audited and helped set up labs, and what I've found over the years is that technicians are not actually doing the testing the same way. In other words, there's variation in the test methodology. Believe it or not, under the good laboratory practices, you can actually calibrate the technicians. If you have a specific test that's being done and you're getting these variations, then my advice to you is to go back and do calibration of the technicians, where you give them a known sample with a known result, and then you have them do the tests side by side, and then you see why or whatever techniques they're doing that are allowing for this variation.
Okay, thank you, Len. It's not strictly root cause, but Tom's saying, how do we raise employees' awareness about GMP? They look down on this.
Yes, every company and plant has a culture. In other words, people do things a certain way. The best method that I've seen in adult education is to really get down and explain why something is important. I'll give you an example. Allergen control, if you go back 30 years or more, it wasn't on the map. But one company came out with a shocker film where allergen showed a child going into anaphylaxis. In other words, it's life-threatening. And most adults, particularly adults that are reasonable, if they saw what could happen if they didn't do their job right with regards to allergen control, perhaps you could sway their opinion on that.
Yeah. Okay. Jose is asking, it's quite an interesting question actually, what to do when root cause only gives you a solution to control the problem instead of eliminating the problem?
Okay, just to rephrase, in other words, it is something that you would have to monitor on a regular basis to prevent it from occurring. And that would be a food safety preventive control, or that would be a critical control point. In other words, every single day, if you were running this process, you would have to be vigilant and have that activity, procedure, or whatever that is to achieve safe food.
So would an example of that be where you rely on people? Is variation in people's motivation, skills, knowledge, and that type of thing. And if the problem is caused by human error, for example, but you can't mistake proof it by using some technology or something, so you're relying on the people to do something, then you have to monitor. Would that be? Am I backing up the right tree with that? Or
yeah. If I understand the question correctly, you would be in a continual mode of monitoring. And but if you were to eliminate a problem, I know that a lot of equipment has design defects. And just to give you an example, I've been in doing consults where I would find many, they call them niches. It's where there's irregularities on the product zone that doesn't allow for them to clean properly. And the real root cause would be to replace the equipment. But in other words, we understand that you can't just go out and willy-nilly and replace all this equipment. So they have to do extensive cleaning that wouldn't ordinarily be required just because the design of the equipment is so poor.
Yeah. And that's where, that discipline of hygienic design of premises, equipment and machinery should be part of the overall picture of thinking, so that you design out, you solve problems before they occur.
And you'll save a lot of money doing it.
Yeah. And that's where purchasing and I guess purchasing and technical and people are involved and should be involved in HACCP in specifying new equipment and things like that.
You bring up, I've taught hundreds and hundreds of HACCP courses, and one of the things I ask in the beginning, why why isn't purchasing here? Because they purchase all the raw materials. Why isn't R&D here?
Yeah.
Where do all the new products come from?
Mm-hmm.
In other words, they have a stake. I had an email last week from a company where R&D wanted to introduce peanuts into their process and other tree nuts. And I said, you need to do an evaluation first to see if you can actually clean your equipment properly.
Yeah.
So in other words, again, it's all preventive.
Yeah, exactly. Chris, root cause analysis can be very time consuming and therefore not always supported by all parties within the company. How do we sell its importance, build it into the company culture? We'll be keen to hear your thoughts and advice on this, please.
Again, an excellent question. It sounds like you need to do a sale job to the upper level management. If you look at again, I'm going to talk about the regulatory apparatus in the United States, is that they have in their legislation, they had said that the site executive, in other words, whoever runs the company and who is ever in charge of the plant, is responsible for food safety. In fact, if you look at the hazard analysis and risk-based preventive controls that went into effect last September, that executive needs to sign the food safety plan, not the quality manager or the HACCP coordinator. So what I'm saying here is that you need to have that buy-in from the executive group. You could tell them about adverse effects, which we talked about in the beginning of the presentation. What type of impact would that have on your organization with regards to millions of dollars for a recall, having your name of your company in the paper, all of these things. So you're lucky that this never happened to you, but I can tell you one thing. Companies that have had a recall act differently after that because what couldn't be done before can now be done.
Yeah. And you're right, Len, that you've got to, let's say a food safety or quality manager in their position, they've got to understand, almost be a psychologist on human behavior, be a salesman, and speak in the language of the people that you're trying to get on board. And if that's senior management, it's about money often,
Absolutely. And that's why I've even seen company calculate the cost of a recall. In fact, I can give you an example. One chocolate company I was working for, I told them that they need to have a clean break in their caramel tank. And, it would be very expensive to clean the caramel tank. And then, lo and behold, on one of their environmentals, they got a positive Listeria species. And here I've been telling them for 3 years that they had to have a clean break, had to clean the tank, and they had to have a recall, and they had fundraiser caramel bars, milk chocolate caramel bars. It was in the millions of dollars to recall all that product. And then guess what? They could clean the caramel tank.
They found a way. I know it's crazy, but that's the way it happens. But yeah, it's food safety manager, quality manager job to just keep fighting, and when you get knocked down, just get back up again and try a different approach and go around the back or around the corner, whichever way. N.K. Weckham, how do we choose the right solution after we identify a problem by root cause analysis?
To be honest with you, you're probably going to try multiple solutions because sometimes you're implementing changes in your process, which is, again, drawing you back to the presentation, and you do multiple things. But what tells you you're okay is that verification step. I've seen people that had problems with equipment again, and they would tinker with it and do certain modifications till they got to the point where it was more reliable to run, but also the fact that they eliminated some of their pest problems, but also their potential for pathogenic bacteria. So root cause analysis can be what if sometimes too, where you implement these changes and you keep that moving until you get to that verification step and you can sign it off as effective.
Okay. Any more questions, ladies and gents, while we have Len with us? Some fantastic questions and great answers from Len.
Excellent questions.
Yeah, can we any more before Len goes? Have we mentioned FMEA? Are you familiar with failure mode?
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, failure mode analysis is another is one I should have mentioned. In fact, failure mode analysis is the basis for HACCP. In other words, what can go wrong? So,
Yeah.
knowing the history of your company and what could go wrong, you would actually analyze that, document it, and implement any of the corrective actions that keep your product safe.
Yeah. Okay. Tony's just made I think this is a comment more than a question. Unfortunately, senior management is more reactive than proactive. You can provide all the what if analysis and relevant cost results, but they still place their head in the sand and assume things will not happen. I don't think that's a one-off. I think that's quite widespread, isn't it? Unfortunately, the attitude and the lack of senior management understanding, buy-in.
Yeah, I agree, and that's why I brought out the point that the at least the regulators in the United States, the FDA, they have made it abundantly clear who is responsible for food safety, and believe it or not, they brought in the Department of Justice that works with the FDA, and they will do a criminal investigation. And recently, most people remember the PCA incident where the Parnell brothers were engaged in criminal activity, and they got 26 and 28 years in prison, respectively.
Yeah.
So, again, I would just say keep at it. Show them why you need to do things a certain way. Another example is pick out companies that are similar to yours that had issues, and use those as examples of what might happen.
Yeah. Okay. Frank saying, Tony, I once actually asked an auditor to make sure a particular issue was on the audit as a finding, and management connected it then. Yeah, sometimes I've seen that before, where auditees actually ask for a non-conformity to be raised and highlight issues that they're trying to solve from their position, unsuccessfully solve.
Yeah, I think it's unfortunate that companies sometimes don't listen to their own people. They wait until if it's an audit finding, then they'll fix it. If you're going to wait for auditors to come in and find all your problems, you are not going to have a good day.
No. Okay, Maribel, a basic root cause analysis started in my facility with 5 whys, but I need to do the next step. Which tool do you recommend?
I would use the Fishbone charts, and I had a memory block, but failure mode analysis is very good to use. That puts everybody in the right mind frame where you would actually go through and say, what if, if we do things a different way, and then you could analyze it prior to implementation.
Yeah. I love Fishbones. I think they're great, and you can get a team together and just really brainstorm, and man, machine, method, material.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, a lot related to senior management. Again, Lisa, sort of on a similar line. How do you encourage senior management to do an internal audit or bring someone in when they are reluctant to do so? Yeah. Okay. Right. Anybody else with a different slant? NK Weckham again. Can we apply a verified effective solution to a similar problem without performing a root cause analysis again? Can we apply a verified effective solution? Right.
Well,
yeah. Okay.
Yeah, if you have a tried and proven corrective action, I mean, as an example, people having reoccurring infestation, typically on a root cause, you would find that everything isn't cleaned on the appropriate frequency. Your master cleaning schedule isn't complete, so you're in a series of just adding more stuff to your cleaning schedule rather than doing the job right the first time. In other words, going in and doing an inventory, walls, floors, ceiling, every structure, and every piece of equipment for in-depth cleaning. So yes, a lot of people could apply another cleaning step.
Okay. Thanks, Len. And I think one final one. I mean, it's a bit specific. I don't know if you can help. Joe say, I work with citrus fruit, a low-risk commodity. Our wash water system is currently not considered a CCP. Are there any studies using root cause analysis in regard to wash water systems?
Yeah, in a condition like that, you would have to do some hazard analysis. In other words, quantify if there is a problem. I know that washing of fruit, if you look at what happened to Jensen Farms with cantaloupe, they actually converted a potato washer unsuccessfully. They didn't add biocides. They didn't have water exchange. And what happened is they contaminated all the fruit with listeria. But to answer your question, what I would do is start to do some sampling of the water quality. And certainly when you start up, things are typically really good. But then as you get into process, again, if you don't have good water exchange, you're not adding the appropriate amount of biocide, then you're going to accumulate potential microbial contamination. So you would have to analyze that to quantify the problem.
Okay. Right, Len. That's bang on the hour mark. So fantastic. Great presentation and excellent. We've had plenty of time for Q&A and there's been some great questions.
Excellent questions.
Answers. Really appreciate your time today, Len, and sharing your knowledge with the IFSQN community. I hope to see you again sometime again in the future. So thank you.
Very good, Simon. Thank you.
Okay. I'll see you soon, Len. Cheers. Okay, ladies and gents, a great presentation from Len Steed from AIB International. I'm sure you'll agree. We will be following up with a recording and the slides also, and we'll send you the certificate of attendance if you've not grabbed it today. So thanks for your attendance. We'll be back in 2 weeks with David Rosenblatt on creep. You'll get the email, so don't worry. Okay, thanks very much. As I say every week, it's Friday. It's the best day of the week. Enjoy your weekend and come back refreshed to fight the fight and convince senior management and get stuck into them root cause analyses next week. Okay, take care, everybody. I'll see you soon.